Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Midweek program at the J.C. Raulston Arboretum. My name is Blake, and I'm the Education Assistant here at the Arboretum. And today, we are tucked away in an obscure part of the garden. We are behind the boxwood garden and, well, what's left of Mount Raulston, because dogs are not allowed in the Arboretum, but we've got a couple of dogs here today for educational purposes, because today we are doing gardening for dogs. We've got Mark Weathington, our director, with his little doggies, Gus and Harvey, as well as Greg Paige, our director of horticulture. And we're going to be talking about ways that you can garden with, by considering your dog, making sure there's a space for them, making sure they're not going to cause too much trouble for you. Okay, so with the announcements out of the way, I think we can pass things over to Mark and Greg for a little bit of gardening for dogs.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Got Greg Paige here, Director of Horticulture. I'm Mark, Director of the Arboretum. Got my two gardening assistants with us as well for home. Got Gus here, Bernadoodle, and Harvey, who's a rescue. He is part Rottweiler, part Chihuahua. I don't know. I make that up, but like a lot of little dogs, he thinks he's a big dog, and they're showing their best sides now. And I want to talk about gardening with dogs. Greg here has got a lot of experience with that. But prior to these little dogs, I had big dogs. I had boxers for many, many years. And so I've had a lot of time to garden with dogs. Another reminder, here at the J.C. Raulston Arboretum, dogs are not allowed. These are for educational purposes only. But what kind of experience do you have? I know...
I've been around dogs my whole life. I've had several as I've had home gardens, and probably my biggest, now that I'm thinking about it, I managed an estate garden when I lived in Delaware, and part of the deal with that job is they had two very boisterous yellow labs that were constant gardening companions when I was there, and just kind of learning how to navigate with them, with newly planted things, dealing with trying to establish turf grass and letting them out at night, those kind of inherent problems. But we get asked jointly and individually a lot of questions on how do you have a garden and have pets at the same time. And while it's fresh in my mind, I'm a firm believer in, there aren't bad pets as much as there are bad pet owners. So a lot of the onus is, having your dog with you, and I think you being out in the yard with them, that's a good thing. They can kind of learn where they can go and can and can't go, and the types of behavior that you want them to do. If you just open the door and let them go and don't really supervise or get them used to being in your yard, of course they're gonna run rampant and do things. My dog, who recently passed, she would get the zoomies and just zip through stuff. And one of the things I quickly learned was if I put barricades or fences or things that were important or expensive, she would more than likely stay out of there. She was a Scottish Terrier. They're known to be voracious diggers. And from a puppy, we discouraged that behavior, and she never dug holes or every once in a while she'd dig things up. I had an $80 Bartzilla tree peony that she dug up 3 times, the only plant that she ever disturbed in the garden. But it's about teaching those behaviors. And being with your dog, making sure they don't get bored, because when they get bored, they get destructive and may rip things up. So keeping those kinds of things in mind is really, really important, I think.
Yeah, I think there's two. To go up that, there's 2 ways to deal with it, and I've done both. When I had larger dogs and I had smaller children and didn't have the energy to deal with training my dogs, and I will admit have been a bad dog owner in terms of training dogs. I had a fenced-in backyard, and I did try planting a few trees there. It was shaded, so I tried planting a few trees there, and my boxers got bored back there. There wasn't a whole, it was big space for them to run around in, and I had 2 of them, but there wasn't much other than that for them to interact with, and so I would come home and there'd be basically a stick with maybe a couple of roots and a couple of leaves of that Japanese maple that I planted laying there, because they just wanted to play with something. They were young and they were playful.
Yep.
And so there's the exclusion, create an area where your dog can't, where you're not gardening really, where the dog has free range to run around, to dig if they want to dig, to do whatever. And that's the easiest thing for somebody who's not going to train their dog.
To be let the dog be a dog.
Right. And so with these dogs, I had moved into a new garden when we got Gus, and Harvey's a more recent addition. I still had one of the boxers, well, actually both the boxers, when we got Gus, and the boxers went in the backyard in the fenced-in area, and Gus went with me gardening as a puppy. And so I trained Gus to not dig in the garden. I trained Gus to stay close to me. I trained Gus, and I've got a clicker that I can click that will, he hears that and knows he's doing something he shouldn't. But, I've trained him. Now, Harvey was a rescue. He's already partially grown. I haven't done as much work on training him, honestly, but he's small enough that it's harder for him to damage things. But I still garden with him, and what I do with him is I have a bunch of hose guides around the garden, and I just drop his leash over a hose guide, and he's got kind of free range. If he starts doing something I don't like, he's close by me, so I can, get him to stop. And it's just that repetitions of, hey, that's not what you're allowed to do, that allows him to. There's a spot, though, in my garden. The 2 places they like to lay, if it's warm outside, are a big patch of ajuga or bugleweed, which is a low ground cover. I let them lay on it. It's fine with me. And then there's a bare spot in my garden, kind of near where I have some chairs sitting out by my front door. And Gus especially loves to lay there because it's up high. I'm often working down below that area. He can see me. He can see the front yard and see who's coming by the street. And if my wife drives home, it's a good perch for him. And it's on the soil, so it's cool. I don't plant there because he's going to lay on something there. And I could try to do a lot of planting and keep him out. And in a past life, I probably would have done that because that's bare space that I could put a plant. But, I'm fighting an uphill battle if I do that. And I'm gardening with my dog, not, gardening in spite of my dog.
That's a good point. And it's taking that design idea and designing for the dogs also. I had spots in my garden in Charlotte where my dog could look down the street or look to see what the neighbors were doing. And they were places where I could have filled up with plants. So what I ended up doing was putting a piece of slate and not planting anything there so that she could go to that spot and she could look down the street, look at the neighbors. It was a very popular perch. There was another spot just up from that, close to our deck, where chipmunks would run from my neighbors back and forth. And she liked to sit there and keep an eye on that path that it had back and forth between our yards. We had a tiny little backyard with a little bit of a hump in the back of it. And I had a Wave Hill chair, a Dan Benarsic chair.
That's what mine are, yeah.
And that was a very good perch for her because she could see the neighbor's cat sitting in that chair and looking over in the yard and also looking down the street in the other direction. So thinking about those places and leaving those places either empty or designed for your dog to interact. I've also seen people that would build fences and build little plexiglass windows at a dog level so they could actually look and see what's going on next door, or having little holes for them to stick their nose in just to smell and sniff. Those are all kind of smart things, and it keeps them occupied. when a dog is sniffing around, their brain is doing so many different things, and it's important to engage and let them experience the yard and be a part of what's going on.
Hold on, got a little ant there. It's gardening with all kinds of critters.
He didn't slap me.
It helps to know the kind of dog. You talked about having a Scotty and really having to focus on, the digging. I knew somebody who had some kind of terrier that wanted to dig, and his problem was the dog didn't dig that much in the garden, but if the dog was out with him and saw him digging something and planting it, it's the same thing squirrels do when you're planting bulbs.
Sure.
They come in after you and dig up the bulbs because they see you, think you're burying some nuts out there that they want to get. So they're looking through their lens. Hey, you're digging something, you're putting this here, let me dig it back out. By playing. You can plant it again.
That's what happened.
Get that peony. I'll dig it out.
Exactly,
you can plant it. You seem to like planting this thing. You're happy to get it. So
that's
exactly I'm going to bring you more joy because I'm a puppy. So this person would not plant things with the dog. The dog stayed inside. He would plant things. He'd get mulch back out there and really tried to cover it up. Would not plant things. And I know even with you don't have a dog that's a serious digger, I know people who vegetable garden, which I don't, say that, if you have that really nice loose soil that you're tilling every year, maybe it's in raised beds, it's whatever, you like digging in there because it's so easy to dig in. You do it with your hands to plant things, don't even need tools. The dog's more, is going to look at that to dig in. So you might need a little fence around it. I have my next door neighbor has 2 young Australian healers, which are high energy dogs.
Yep.
They don't dig, they don't chew on the plants, but they run through my garden like crazy whenever my dogs are out. And I like the dogs playing because it gets some energy out. And so there are a few plants that are right in the little bed between my house and theirs, and their dogs, they're going from point A to point B.
Doesn't matter what's in between.
Doesn't matter what's in between. They're going there. So if I plant something small, herbaceous things are generally okay if they get trampled a little bit. But if I have small shrubs or trees that are, as you say, special,
yes,
read that as expensive, I will do something as simple as just a couple of bamboo stakes on either side, just so that there's something solid there that they'll kind of break around to the side. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well in a larger sense. But sometimes it's just as simple as just directing them a little bit off each way.
Yep.
It helps with age because I've become much less concerned about that particular plant and more with, this is a garden for everybody, including the dogs. Let's talk a little bit about some barriers.
Okay.
Because I know there's a problem with my dogs. They're used to my garden. I've planted out my garden, and they kind of know it. But if I put in a new bed, that's something new. More likely they'll dig in it because I'll have just amended the soil. It'll be newly planted things. And whether it's a new bed or not, kind of the best thing to do is let them learn not to go in there. Mm-hmm. So I know you had some great ideas for how you do that.
Yeah. We like to do props here. It's a good way to learn new tricks and trades and secrets. Again, talking about my peeps at Chanticleer in Wayne, Pennsylvania, they a lot of creativity there. They did a Instagram video one time on bamboo splitters. And right after I watched that, I went straight to Amazon and I bought 2, a small one and a big one. And what they do is they'll take bamboo pieces and split the bamboo so you got some flexible barriers and barricades, and to keep people from going off the paths there. And also it has kind of an Asian kind of a theme. They would interloop these, and you can do it lots of different ways to kind of direct people on paths where they didn't want to have a lot of barricades, but you could see these things every so often. So what I did is we had an endless supply of bamboo on our property where I used to work. And I would, take pieces of bamboo and use the splitter. And you get something like this, which is very flexible, and you can cut it to whatever size you want. It's probably too hard in here. The ground is very hard here. So just kind of do that and interloop them together. And that kind of defines your bed edge, and it'll keep your dogs from just running straight through there. You could even do that around plants, things that are special, smaller or bigger, even if you just put them, straight in the ground like that, any kind of variation of what you want to do. And I want to split one because I like the sound that this makes, and it's relatively easy. Any length that you want, and you have to have it against something kind of hard to start with. Might have cut these too long, just to kind of get it going. And just like that, you've got all those little pieces. I've seen this in garden centers to buy, and it's a little bit expensive. A good use of an invasive plant, and you can cut these to any size that you want. Don't be surprised if you see some of these here in the Arboretum somewhere in the not too distant future. Perfect for Asian Valley, kind of has that Japanese Asian theme, and it's super easy to do, and I love the sound that thing makes. Yeah. For bigger pieces of bamboo, they make these bigger, and it says on here not to use a hammer on these things, because I don't think this is very good quality metal. My friends at Chanticleer told me that too, because they were hitting these with hammers and they kept breaking them, and they didn't read on here that it says don't use a hammer. So the way that I used to do this is I had a cinder block in the ground, and you put the end against the cinder block and drive it in that way, and it goes much faster. But very simple.
And not permanent, so you don't necessarily need it, whether it's for a dog or for
as long as you want it on the ground.
Once plants come in, you have a really good defined path, you have a really good defined edge, you might not need it anymore. But quick, simple, for a pretty inexpensive tool to get that. And you can do Waddle fencing, which is just taking flexible things. Traditionally it's willow branches, but
red twig dogwood, anything you cut back in the wintertime.
Anything you cut back in the winter,
instead of throwing it away.
Stakes in the ground and then just weave it back and forth. And it's if you're training the dog, it's really about the visual as much as anything else. So if you did a woven a osier thing, it only needs to be 4 or 6 inches really, and you're just telling the dog, hey, here's where you don't go.
And I've done that with this, with just either take small pieces of bamboo and drive them in as stakes, and then just weave these split pieces through those small pieces of bamboo. Same kind of thing.
Yeah, I have to go back and look at my pictures. There was something at Chanticleer where they were doing this, except for they did it in a way I hadn't seen before, which was really effective, and I can't remember it now off the top of my head. So, that's it. Exclusion or inclusion in training is really, really the keys. Former director here, Denny Warner, he's got labs, got big lab puppies. One of the things he loved is no, it's not your garden. Other people can be here. But he's got, he knows how much his black labs love the water. So he's got a water garden, with a waterfall, and he made it purposefully big enough and enough big stones around it. Instead of it being all the way planted around, the dog can get up on top, gets that high view, and splash in the water there that's moving and bubbling. He can go down, he can jump in the water, and it's a beautiful landscape feature. You could come in his garden, you'd be like, wow, that is great. The rock work, the way it's A+, outstanding landscaping, but it was built with these young labs in mind. And that dog will splash around and then it'll lay on a rock like a seal. And, and it loves it. It loves it. Labs love being in the water. And so, so I know what he's got on the bottom. I think he put a liner, but then it's lined with something that protects the liner from nails and things like that. So it's if you can think about it in advance, great. A lot of us are doing things retroactively, but still, you kind of, if you're doing that, they love it. And when they get excited about something, when they learn something's there, they will go to that spot. There's a spot where Gus has seen both a frog and a lizard, kind of in a little corner by my house where I have my water faucet. And so he comes outside, he's got to go over there and check, make sure that frog and that lizard hasn't come back here. So, I keep that in mind as I'm planting things. And the big thing with plants that people ask about, we think about protecting the plants. The thing that people always ask about is
Lawn.
Well, I wasn't going to go to lawn. We can come back to lawn, but eating the plants.
Yeah.
And there are poisonous plants out there. They're poisonous to you. They're poisonous to me. Apparently not poisonous to deer. Rhododendron, poisonous. Deer don't mind them. Thanks. You protecting us down here. I have read a lot of stuff. I've talked with 2 vets before we did this, so I wouldn't say anything too stupid, more stupid than usual. And they said, yes, they get dogs in who've eaten plants. And I'll be interested to hear your experience. But the plants that the dogs that are eating plants, almost never it's a fatal thing. It's usually dogs that are either kept indoors all the time, they're eating indoor plants because they're bored, or it is dogs that are understimulated outside, like in a fenced area by themselves, nowhere really to run around, and you're gardening in that fenced in area with the dog, and it's just bored.
Yep.
But in general, animals are as smarter than most of us people, and most poisonous things taste bad. They're poisonous so they don't get eaten, not because they want to kill things. So most poisonous things are bitter, they don't taste very good, whatever the case may be. So it's actually pretty insignificant numbers. I mean,
That's been, people I know that have dogs and gardens. I know very few that have had issues of dogs getting sick from eating poisonous plants. The estate garden I used to work for, one of their dogs used to eat acorns. He would, like a vacuum cleaner would go along the ground and just like suck them in, and had problems with that. But a lot of that was he wasn't getting stimulated, he was bored. But none of my dogs had ever done that. They've chewed on some things, but again, it was because I left her outside and forgot to get her, or she was ready to go for a walk, or the neighbor's cat was right there and she was getting frustrated. And I've talked to my vet in the past about that sort of stuff, but have never really heard that it was an issue. They're going to taste bad. They're not going to eat them, and if they do eat them, it's going to come out relatively quickly.
Yeah.
Those are my experiences with eating things that may or may be poison. If you're that concerned, then don't have those plants in your garden.
And if you've got dogs and you're concerned about that, or you've got young children,
yes,
there are lists of poisonous plants. A lot of those lists are things that many of those cover a wide gamut. There are very few plants that are really deadly poisonous. There's oleander. That's bad. That when I lived on the coast and we had a lot of it, I had my gardeners had to wear masks and goggles when they were cutting that back because the sawdust is such a problem. So you might not want that. You might not want castor beans growing as an annual, because those do have little red seeds that fall that could be eaten, and it doesn't take more than for a small dog, one for sure.
Yeah.
So there are some things that are very highly toxic,
and stay away from those. But there's a lot of information online about that.
Yeah, I mean, you can go in there and see that rhododendron, azaleas are poisonous. There's no dog that's going to eat azaleas enough to make them sick. No. They may bite it or something, And a lot of times people are scared because they see a dog eating grass and then throwing up, and that's often the way a dog is getting something out that it doesn't want. It isn't so much the grass as it is everything else. There's something else going on with it. So if you're very concerned, consult those lists, but I don't think it's terribly necessary.
No.
You want to talk about lawns?
Unfortunately.
Never. No.
Unfortunately. So that's a big question that I get from people is, how do I get my dogs to stop killing the grass when they urinate on the grass? And correct me if I'm wrong, I've not done my homework. It's the uric acid that's in the urine. And in some dogs, I think in female dogs, it's stronger than males. The easiest solution for that is, and you always see it in that halo of the light on the back door when somebody opens the door and lets the dog out and does its business and comes inside. An easy way to fix that is to put the leash on and walk out the front door and go across the street, go someplace else. Don't keep going to that one spot, because that's quick, that's easy, you're ready to go to bed. That's the easiest way to fix that.
Well, and you put that leash, and I know I've done this with dogs, even if you put the leash on, the spot where they generally will go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
If you go somewhere else, it always takes them longer.
And you're ready to go to bed.
So you go out to that spot and say, "Oh,
let's go."
So, but it's you can take them out into your garden. I like your idea of going to your neighbors across the street. But,
That's what I would do.
But as long as you move around and go in different spots. And, I have had plants killed actually by my next door neighbor's former dog, who peed on the same plant all the time, and I'm pretty sure killed it. Can't remember what it was, maybe a sage. Not an edible one. We weren't eating that. But my dogs, especially Harvey here, he's got a couple plants he really likes to pee on when we come outside, and so far hadn't done a whole lot to them.
No.
So that generally isn't a problem. They did kill much of my very small lawn, my very small turf. Now I have a lawn that is mostly not grass. And it's just, that's fine with me. I don't need it to be this emerald green sheet. I've got a lot more pollinators and things in there. Are you getting jealous? So, we got anything else, or we want to turn it over for questions?
Let's see if we've got some questions.
Okay, for sure. One question that was asked right off the bat was, how does the JCRA respond to visitors with service dogs?
All right, I can answer that. We are considered a laboratory. The J.C. Raulston Arboretum is classified through the university as a laboratory. And there are very strict rules about laboratories. We can have service animals in here. These are animals that are highly trained. It's not just that they have a bib on them, but they're highly trained, and they are for very specific needs. There are ones, and sometimes you can't tell. The obvious ones are people who are blind, but there are ones who detect strokes. I have a good friend whose daughter, the daughter's my good friend too. I have a good friend who is autistic, has some real anxiety issues, and really has trouble. And she's got a dog, and that dog can sense when she's going there and will stand up and put its paws on her shoulders and kind of push her down and lay down on top of her, and she just calms down that way. So there are these and those are perfectly welcome. Emotional support animals, while these guys are my emotional support, they are not allowed. Those are not technically service animals, even though they're providing you with a service. And one of the quick and easy ways to tell if a dog is not a service animal is how it acts on a leash. If it is on a leash, it should be standing right beside the person or leading them. It will be highly trained. I'm losing Harvey there. It will not bark at people. It will not pull at its leash to come towards people. It will never do that. That's just the way it is. And as far as I know now, despite what people have told me here, there are no service snakes, hamsters, rabbits, cats,
Camels.
camels. I've never had a camel. I'm only mentioning things that I've actually heard of, had through here. So that's the answer for that.
Fair enough. And I will point out that all the plants here in the Arboretum are all emotional support plants. So
That's right.
absolutely. Okay, someone asked, how do you keep a dog from digging when you have moles and voles?
How do you keep a dog from digging when you have moles and voles? Wow, that's a good question, because part of me says good, especially with voles. Voles kill your plants pretty quickly. So a hole dug and vole killed may be better off for your plants than
The trade-off.
the vole.
It's a trade-off. Some dogs are more prone to that. Terriers are very predator driven. Hence my dog getting a little bit crazy whenever she saw the chipmunks in the garden. And I've got a very long story about her catching a possum in the backyard at 11:30 at night when I let her out for her evening constitution. But it's a bit of a trade-off. They do so much damage to the garden. The voles do. Moles are more in the turf grass. It's hard to say yes or no or a right or wrong thing concerning that.
If you want to stop it, it's going to be about training.
Yep.
If you train your dog not to dig at any other times, you train your dog to come, to sit, to, stay, whatever it is, whatever your commands are, you gotta, when you see it digging, you gotta get that. And if you have moles and voles and you have a dog with that hunting instinct, that varmint hunting instinct, and you leave your dog in, let's say, a fenced-in garden without you being out there,
It's going to happen.
no matter how good your training is, that dog's going to dig. But but also be very aware that your dog digging is going to open things up, and so don't use baits and things like that are poisonous for moles and voles in your garden if your dog might dig it up.
For sure. Okay, so this might be a rather abrupt gear shift, but somebody's asking, what about gardening for cats? Because their neighbors have outdoor cats, and they'd like to keep their cats safe in their yard.
Don't have outdoor cats.
There you go.
Cats kill birds.
Yeah.
Cats killed so many birds.
Lots of birds and lizards and other things.
Yeah.
I mean, you can have a cat that you have in the yard. Again, it's about training, and you can train cats. Cats that spend the predominantly most of their time outdoors, kind of unsupervised, that's always going to be a problem. And it's about training and being responsible. Never mind the fact that
Wait, are you talking about training a cat?
it's possible. It's possible. The thing I don't like about outdoor cats is where they use where they do their constitution, and it was always in anything that I had planted. And my dog thought that was caviar.
Well,
And she always found it no matter where it was in the yard. And there's nothing worse than trying to get that out of your dog's mouth.
yeah.
It's a workable thing. We'll save these questions for when we do cats in the garden. And it won't be you or I doing it, I don't think.
Well, yeah, because I'd say don't have cats in the garden. If you're worried about things killing birds, there's nothing worse than cats. Cats kill collectively more birds than, wind power, or certainly more than Nandina or anything like that.
The statistics are remarkable.
They are, yeah, they're crazy.
Okay, before we go into another question.
I do want to say,
Yeah.
my wife worked at a pediatric pulmonologist, so lungs for kids, and when they would do a new patient in, they had a series of questions. One of them was, do you have any pets? And the woman answered, yes, we have chickens. And my wife said, well, I'm talking about indoor pets. So, well, they're kind of indoor outdoor chickens. Wound up, they nested under the crib.
Oh, geez.
poor child had lung issues. You wonder why.
Go figure.
And that's our thing always with, is always those are indoor, outdoor chickens. Whenever somebody's talking about their chickens.
A lot of people are allergic to cats in particular too.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're not anti-cat.
Not one little. I love cats. I'm a cat person, so
Yeah.
I'm there with you, cat people. No worries. But we did have somebody have a cute little comment. They said my grandmother would command her dog to dig, and he would dig holes to plant bulbs.
I've seen dogs do that. Again, if you train them to do that kind of thing, that's great. But don't get upset when they've been out in the yard for a couple hours, while you've been inside watching your TV programs, and things are ripped asunder in the garden. It's all about training and keeping them stimulated and stopping the behavior if you don't want it to happen.
Yeah, I agree. And these dogs, where we garden, it's not fenced in, so they're only outside with me. Where I'm keeping an eye on them, more or less. So I can stop that behavior. It's good for them to be outside, and it's good for me to be out there working both mentally and physically.
Oh, yeah.
So, and it actually, when it's been this hot on the weekend, a couple of weekends, I've been like, maybe I'll just hang around inside. And then I look at these dogs, Gus especially, who has a pouting spot inside. He sits in one spot and stares at you looking sad. And I look at him and look at him. He'll just stare at me. And finally I'll have to get up and go outside and do some gardening. And, then I wind up spending the next 6 hours outside because once I got out there and doing it, it was great. So, it's good for both of us. And so it's even better than if I were putting him outside on his own in a yard to get exercise, because he forces me to get out.
All righty. So I'm not too sure about this next question because mushrooms aren't really something people cultivate in the garden. But someone's asking, what about mushrooms?
What you need to do, there are 4 spots left in Frank Hyman's fortune for mushrooms.
Nice segue.
And you need to sign your dog up for that.
Nice.
Or maybe you won't be able to bring your dog here, so you have to come in. You'll have to come in, learn it, and then train your dogs which mushrooms they can or can't eat.
I've never seen a dog eat a mushroom.
No.
There's something about that flora that they stay away from. We would get the big puffballs come up in our grass or even on walks. Could care less about that.
And one thing I would think that a dog might like, the stink horns, which come up and stink. And my dogs, they might roll in it, but I don't think they'll eat it. I've never seen that as a problem. My dogs will eat all kinds of vegetables when I'm cooking and drop them on the floor. There's a few that they don't eat, and one of those is mushrooms.
Yeah.
Now, maybe if I'm dropping truffles on the floor, I don't know, maybe they'd like that.
Mushrooms and kiwi. I've never seen a dog eat mushrooms or a kiwi.
Now, I did have my brother-in-law had dogs. He lived out south of Raleigh, and one day we were in his backyard. We were in his house looking at his dogs, big backyard, and kind of wooded at the back edge. And his dogs, 2 of them, black labs, would sit in the ground staring up, and then were jumping up and biting. And we thought they were going after insects. Wound up, one of the trees was a big mulberry, and the mulberry fruits were ripe and were falling, and they were sitting under there and catching them before they even hit the ground.
Now that I had a dog when I was a kid growing up in Alabama we had pecan trees in our yard, and she would crack them and spit out the shell and eat the meat of the nut.
That's awesome. That's so crazy. Okay, so here's a question. Someone asked, can dog poop be used as a fertilizer? Not in compost, but just sparingly tossed under a tree.
I'm going to say no, because dogs eat meat and meat-based foods, and you don't want that waste in that cycle. I mean, we would always bag ours and throw it in the trash. And I've seen those receptacles that you can put in your backyard for them to kind of compost down. But I mean, in other parts of the world, they use far worse things for fertilizer.
I'll say this. I have trained my dogs to almost exclusively go to the bathroom in my woodland area, so that they're not in my perennial beds. They're not in my lawn, but they are in my woodland garden. And it is very much cultivated garden. Harvey likes to do it in the pathway, so I always have to scoop it out. But I mean, I throw it in there. It is, if you've got 2-3 dogs, there's no volume that's going to make a difference.
No.
It's not fertilizer. It's just something that's going to break down. It's like if a deer or wolf or, I mean, the meat-based thing is exactly right.
It breaks down very fast. It's not like if it's in like your situation where it's in the woodlands, I wouldn't worry about removing it.
If you run a kennel or you breed dogs and you have 20 of them and you have significant amounts of dog poo, you don't want to go out and be spreading that in your garden. I don't know if it would hurt. I definitely don't think it would help much, although ultimately carbon is carbon, and that's a big part of it. But yeah, and there's very few of us who have that kind of situation where there's enough to make a difference.
For sure.
But
Yes.
I wouldn't, like if you have a nice Japanese maple in the center of your lawn with, a 3-foot tree ring of mulch around there, I would not take all the poop and put it right there around that tree.
Okay. So
That was all, let me go back and say, that was all just off the top of my head. I had no
science.
no science behind that.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, someone says, my Goldens trample the grass, especially around the perimeter. They've killed the ajuga. Only dwarf monkey grass survives the trampling. Do you know of any other grasses and ground covers that are pretty step tolerant?
So one that's working for me, if it's sunny, now it sounds like it may not be so sunny there, is one of our little native asters, Erigeron pulchellus. We grow Lynnhaven carpet and meadow muffin. Super quick spreader, drought tolerant, tough as nails. It grows thick and dense. The issue is anything like that, no matter what it is, you have to get it established. And that's where you look at like some of the
barricading it off. It gets established.
And with the barricade, you were talking about kind of doing those loops along the edge. You could also, if you plant some ground covers along a strip, you can do those barricades kind of sideways over it, so the dog can't just trot along the edge there. It can cut through, but it'll keep it from just walking down the whole length.
Some of the warm season turf grasses are more, a lot of the development of those are ones that are more foot traffic tolerant. So if it's an established lawn, I would look at some of those for those kinds of ideas of things that can take that kind of trampling from 4 little feet instead of 2 big human feet.
Yeah. Let me think. Some other ones. If it's shady, one that I recommend a lot is the another native, our green and gold, Chrysogonum virginianum, eco-lacquered spider. The other ones are great, but not very quick. Eco-lacquered spider is very, very quick. You will have to do some work with it because it sends out long rhizomes that root, and so you'll just have to you take those and you keep plugging them back in to keep it full. That might be a good choice.
Those are the 2 that I would have said.
Anything you're running across all the time is going to be tough. Maybe some Tracheospermum, but you're going to have to get it good and established before
they start
it's going to be
on it again.
Yeah, you're going to need 2 or 3 years of really getting it going with almost any plant.
All righty. Well, that is all of the questions we have in the chat. So thank you so much, Mark and Greg, for pulling this talk together for us. And thank you so much, Harvey and Gus, for joining us on this marvelous occasion.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely.
They've been missing this.
No kidding.
They did get to come out when we were closed for the pandemic. They got to come spend time in my office.
Yeah.
So.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. We will be back next Wednesday at 3 o'clock. We'll be doing Midweek with Mark, and Mark will be talking about ground covers. So be sure to join us for that.
Hey,
See y'all then.
I already gave you a preview.
There you go. Y'all take care.